Open Door is the podcast multifamily owners, builders, and developers turn to for insights, ideas, and identifying solutions. You don't want to miss the latest episode. Welcome to Open Door by Cox Communities, a show dedicated to bringing you the latest information, hottest trends, and newest technologies for you to consider when making decisions for your multifamily communities. Hi, I'm your host, Valerie Sargent. And today on the show, we'll be talking all about the importance of staying relevant and some of the best ways to bring new tech into older multifamily communities. Joining us for this important conversation is Tony Sousa, the Vice President of Marketing Relations at RPM Living, a leading full-service multifamily property management, investment, and development company known for its innovative approach to property management. Tony brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in implementing cutting-edge solutions in multifamily housing. And along with Tony, we also have the pleasure of being joined by Jerrod Smith, Vice President at Cox Communities. Jerrod is an expert in leveraging technology to enhance resident experiences and operational efficiency within multifamily properties. Together, Tony and Jerrod will share insights on how owners and managers of older multifamily communities can successfully retrofit or upgrade their properties with the latest smart home technology. We'll explore the challenges, benefits, major considerations, and best practices involved in this transformative process. So stay tuned as we dive into this fascinating topic with Tony Sousa and Jerrod Smith. Let's begin. Welcome, Tony and Jerrod. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So before we dive into our conversation, I would like to take a moment to have both of you introduce yourselves and let our audience get to know you just a little bit. I'd love to hear about your backgrounds and your current roles. Tony, you with RPM Living, and welcome to the family, Little Rocco. I know you just had an addition to your family. So Tony, you'll go first, and then Jerrod, I'd like for you to tell everyone about your work with Cox Communities after that.
Yeah, Valerie, thank you very much. Great to be here with Jerrod and yourself. So I'm Tony Sousa. I'm the VP of Marketing Relations for RPM Living. Ultimately, I do a lot of different things, but my responsibility largely is to be the company's brand ambassador and spokesperson throughout the country. But I've spent a lot of time in operations, and I think we're going to get into some of that stuff today. I've spent most of my career, frankly, in operations. A lot of people ask me today is, not only what do you do, but how do I get your job? I have no answers for them. And I just feel fortunate to be on the role that I am and feel the wonderful responsibility of what it is, but having as much fun as I possibly can and work with a great team. And obviously I work for a great company. So that's what I do.
Thank you, Tony. And Jerrod, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your journey to Cox Communities.
Thanks, Valerie. And Tony, thank you once again for joining us for the conversation. I've been blessed with over 17 years in this industry, and my journey to Cox Communities actually started at that point in time 17 years ago. I did not know that I was going to be an account executive and then lead teams and eventually become an executive that has the ability to really be blessed with the Cox Communities team, where we establish the deep relationships. We're at the forefront of property tech, and we're also building long-standing relationships and follow through on our promises to our customers. And that's exactly what led me to where I'm at today, is wanting to be a part of that and lead this awesome organization.
Well, I'm so glad to have you both here. Thank you again for joining me. When it comes to retaining and attracting residents, smart home tech amenities are no longer just things that are nice to have. They are actually necessities to meet the demands and needs of today's residents. So, Tony, what are some of the primary benefits of retrofitting older multifamily communities? What are some of, of the actual benefits in putting smart home technology into these types of communities for owners and residents?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the overarching focus initially when you're looking at a value add asset is that good old fashioned ROI, right? What is it that we're going to be implementing? What are the potential value, rent opportunities? And I think there's, ultimately for operators and managers, in working with our tech consultants, like Cox and others, to really go in and say, what is that technology that's going to provide that value? What is that relevant technology in 2024, but not even 2024, but really, I think looking, call it 2 to 3 years out or 3 to 5 years out, what's going to be relevant for our residents at that time. And so I think it's a combination of things. I think for residents, they want to feel as though their apartment community or where they live is sort of in line with today's marketplace and has some of the smart technology amenities and other things that some of their sister properties or maybe their friends that live in another property have. Obviously, in this current economic climate, they're also strongly considering costs and rent and premiums and things that are involved in that. But ultimately, what I tell a lot of folks, and I remind, when I was in operations for as long as I was, is residents at the end of the day still will pay for value. And so if they believe that the amenity or the tech package or the smart technology that's in that unit is worth X dollars, because really in its most simplest way, residents do sort of equate a dollar amount. And frankly, even on a rent roll, we allocate a specific dollar amount for a washer and dryer or a smart tech package, right? So sure, there's a lot of technology that also helps us amenitize units. But at the end of the day, it's as simple as that and allocating a dollar amount. And ultimately, the marketplace will tell us and the resident will tell us if they find that value. And obviously, that's where us as operators lean on our tech support and experts in the space like Jerrod and his team to say, what is happening today? What is happening for, tomorrow? And of course, lean into the opportunities for premiums and other opportunities to provide value for a resident's experience.
That's great. So, Jerrod, what are the most common challenges or obstacles you've seen multifamily owners and managers face when retrofitting or upgrading older buildings with smart technology?
What you just heard Tony say, at the end of the day, it's about value, ROI, and experiences. And I like to think about properties as you do humans. Each one is significantly different than the next. And if it's significantly different, you need to understand the goals of the customer and also the goals of what they want to do with that property. But then what's inside of that property matters. What do I mean when I say that? Here's what I mean. The infrastructure and integration of what they currently have in place. It matters. Do they have prop tech? If they have prop tech, you need to understand, what do they operate on? What's their property management systems? What access systems do they have? Because that will lead you then down the road of asking, well, what's your smart hardware? Is it compatible? Is it not compatible? And the puts and takes of that decision then either increase or diminish said value, like you heard from Tony. And the last piece is the wiring and construction variables. To me, this is one that matters the most because there could be significant amount of variables to each and every unit or the way that we have to connect to that particular property. And then the design, implementation, and then the solution in which the residents operate on could be impacted by any of those if you don't do it the right way. Again, it comes down to selecting that partner that can really tackle those three. Because when you have an established property, you have to understand the puts and takes of the decision you're making in front of you with that property specifically.
Absolutely. Every community is so different. Tony?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Jerrod, I think you said that incredibly eloquently. And obviously, you have years of experience behind you and probably years of categorical sort of missteps, right? Just i.e. experience in not addressing some of these questions. And I speak on behalf of myself as well, not that by no means to say that you've taken missteps as though I haven't. So we all have, and we've learned along the way. And real-time technology is changing in just that, right? It's almost in real time. And the point that I really wanted to make was really, for the listeners, especially on the operator management side, is find yourself a guy like Jerrod that's that's asking those right questions, that's providing context. Obviously, Jerrod has a wealth of experience, and I think that's really important for operators and managers to align themselves with the right partners, the right companies, the right representatives, the right leadership to make sure that you are asking a lot of those correct, pragmatic questions. Because if you're not asking those questions, and sometimes, frankly, operators don't know what questions to ask, and Jerrod could probably speak to that as well. That's where we look to the subject matter experts in the tech space to say, what am I not asking? What don't I know that I need to know? And that's really important for those listening as well. So, just probably a little bit of a plug for you, Jerrod, but, I've worked with many representatives in different companies and frankly, we've found ourselves in difficult situations because I didn't probably ask all the questions I needed to, but at the same time, I also didn't know the questions I needed to ask as well because I'm an operator and I'm not a subject matter expert in tech either, right? So I think there's a lot of people on the operations side that can probably align with that sentiment that I just expressed, that they are wonderful, experienced operators. They maybe don't have the level of expertise, and that's where you need to really align with those subject matter experts.
Tony, are there ways that property owners or managers can do a feasibility assessment for retrofitting their specific building with smart home features?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in collaboration with people like Jerrod and his team and others, is to really do a comprehensive analysis of the property, the building, the scope, the construction. I think you made great points, Jerrod. I mean, I think the build out, either new development or we were speaking of the value add assets. The bones in which the property has been built. Does it provide the capabilities? Everybody wants the new shiny object. The reality is, what's most important is, can that new shiny object integrate and be rolled out? And how comprehensive of a process can it be? Will it be an overnight thing or a short matter of time, or is it a complete overhaul and reconstruction project to insert some of the newest and fastest technology available? And the reality is, on some of the older assets, it is a larger question for you to go to your ownership about and talk about capital that needs to be spent to retrofit some of these assets in a way that will make them relevant today, but more specifically relevant for the future.
Right, because the wiring in an older property is a lot different than everything that's laid down for a new community. So
yeah, and one other point that I just want to make on the heels of that, I think there's a lot of representatives that I think show up and talk about smart tech and talk around smart tech, and frankly, the topic itself is sexy because it's relevant, right? And it sounds cool and fun, and I think it's really important for managers and operators to have an understanding of their asset. And understand ultimately, because it's very easy for operators to say, "Oh, that sounds great," based on a sales pitch. But ultimately, I think having them take a more pragmatic approach, maybe involve some of their leadership as well to have a comprehensive discussion about it. Ultimately, get your owner and or investor involved as well. If it's a third party, obviously owner managed, a little different discussion there. But ultimately, having I think a lot of leadership at the table in discussing large projects, and even I would even argue some of the smaller projects that maybe don't have such an overhaul. I still think it's important to have a lot of thoughtful people at the table to really think through these technologies, especially, again, like I said, not for just today, but you need to be thinking about implementation and the technology for tomorrow, and especially at the pace in which technology moves. It's so rapid.
Absolutely. Jerrod, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that? And what are some of the key considerations when selecting specific smart home technologies for older multifamily buildings?
Tony said a lot of awesome things in there, and I agree with every single thing. I want to actually...
He's an awesome guy.
Exactly. I want to emphasize something very special in there. The magnitude matters. The magnitude of what you're trying to do needs to make sure that you also, in the considerations, don't impact the ROI and the experience of the residents who live at the particular property. Because of these particular properties are older, they're not a brand new build where you can construct when you want to and how you want to. It's a delicate process of making sure that resident still feels the sense of community while you're doing the project that you want to do. Along with that, it's also important to consider your staff. They're going to interact with smart technology on a daily basis. And if their experience is not one of positivity, how are they supposed to portray that positivity to the residents who live there? The needs of the staff, we need to make sure that it drives efficiencies is number one to me. Those efficiencies and operations give time back. We never have enough time on a daily basis. Why not give some time back where they can spend some more time with the residents or doing something that's going to impact that ROI? The level of integrations actually can impact that. It's why when you're choosing the partner in which you do, you need to consider magnitude, the experience the staff need to go through, and the solution you're going to put on the actual property to then understand the level of expertise needed for that support model, which we definitely need to have during deployment, implementation, and then the customer experience, the last part.
You raise a good point because it's a resident experience happening at the time too with a retrofit. Is there anything that you do to minimize disruption? Like, how do you help the resident feel better about what's happening with construction during a retrofit?
Yeah, communication's key. What you need to have is make sure you have a project manager who's going to take the project from the ideation session and all the discovery you need to do with your particular customer all the way through implementation, deployment, and then the account manager at the end who manages the account for the entire relationship. It needs to be very detailed, but at the end of the day, it's communication. You have a plan that you've promised. You need to stick to that plan. If there's any changes, proactively, you need to be communicating with that particular customer, letting them know the options which are available to make sure they still get the end result, and be very agile. Technology is one, it can be tricky, but the more agile you are throughout and flex during the process, the better you're going to be off as far as the properties we're talking about here today. They are a little bit on the, we'll call it wiser side because they have time on their side.
Yes.
And we need to make sure that we give the level of attention to the details as we go through.
Well, and that brings up another thought too. How do you navigate the integration of smart home systems with existing infrastructure and building codes? It's a different world out there with building codes too when doing this.
Yep. It's all about the product and the resourcing at this point. And everything we're talking about today is centered around connectivity. That is the key ingredient to powering anything we're talking about. So that's what I mean by the infrastructure and actually treating every property different, because that infrastructure, the connectivity matters. If you want that experience to happen, connectivity is the main place you start. And regardless of your variables, this is going to be key. And then your resources that you use with that connectivity as a complement is going to be key as you go through the deeper parts of your project, going through the construction pieces, going through the remodels, going through the new interfaces. All of that matters. That's why we begin with the sales engineer. They are the experts in analyzing every piece that we talk about today. And they deliver on those commitments through the drawings, the schematics, everything that's going to have to be considered with that connectivity, which would then be, which our goal is every single time we do this, is to take the pressure off of property staff to help them maintain what they do every single day. That's lease these units, make sure the community has a community feel to it, and there's limited disruption as we go through.
So important. Tony, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's enjoyable to hear Jerrod speak in the way that he does. I think it just speaks to his experience and understanding the sensitivity, the nuance. You asked him a question about the resident experience, and I think a lot of those on the supplier side, even the tech side, they would never admit that they forget about that side of things. But I'll tell you, a group of people that don't forget about that is on-site operations. They interact with those residents on a daily basis. We'd like to think in the most positive way all the time. The reality is we're constantly solving problems in real time, and not always with the most generous of residents that are giving us a lot of time and space. Let's be honest. Especially these days, post-pandemic, the game has changed. And so, I think Jerrod made a great point and in one word sort of summed it up with communication. But I'll use this analogy for those listening. You asked about Rocco, my little one, but he did spend some time in the hospital. Some may know, some may not. And he's doing very well now for anyone concerned. So thank you. But I would actually draw an analogy as Jerrod was speaking. In real time, we had to work closely with our medical team and health team to make some difficult decisions along the way in the benefit of our family and the benefit of Rock. And the only way for us to do that in such a rapid, fast-paced environment in real time as things change and evolve with, testing, panel testing, blood testing, those sorts of things is that word communication. We needed to know as soon as we got information what that information was, and the experts in the room. In our situation, obviously doctors, nurses, but we also have stakeholders in the room, right? Parents, and we also have the patient, if you will, as well. So there's a lot of stakeholders in the room to make not easy decisions. And so I think, again, it's key that communication, just to bring it back to our industry, is having those stakeholders in the room to be able to sort of operate in real time, to make, some real time decisions based on expertise is very helpful. And then also being able to communicate that to residents about what's going on. Also, not to overuse the word real time, but residents today's expectation is that you're communicating today and now. And if something changes in a couple of hours, I'd like to know. I may never respond to a massive text or e-blast, but I read it. And
Absolutely.
and so I think that's important for operators and, and management to understand. And I think mostly they do, but sometimes, I think we fall back on the communication because no one responds. I think that's probably just a human tendency to want or expect or a kind response back. In today's busy world, you don't always get that, but it doesn't diminish your responsibility as a management group and a team to over communicate to your resident base about what's going on. And I'm sure everyone listening can put themselves as a resident, whether it be you live in a home and the water's out in the neighborhood, or you live in an apartment community and the water's out in your community. You want to know, you may not respond to every single email and text, but you want to get real-time updates. And so I thought, Jerrod, you make a great point, but obviously with my real life experience, the metaphor for me was, working with a team of experts and getting, as rapid information as we possibly can so that we can know what's happening and feel comfortable with potential outcomes that, ideally in our business aren't life and death, right? But outcomes, although if you talk to a resident about having water or not, I'm sure it could feel life or death, but
they might really need a shower.
Yeah. Or haven't had one in a long time, right? Whatever the case is. But just understanding the urgency, I think, of communication. I think it's an overused word in a lot of ways. But
one of the most important.
It's vital. I mean, it's vital to every relationship we have, every context. The best leaders that we all probably know are probably some of the best communicators, knowing when to sort of macro communicate and knowing also when to micro communicate in some ways. And, for lack of a better term, I think the audience understands, what we're referring to.
As an emotional intelligence strategist and EQ executive coach, I am always banging the communication drum. It is one of the most important things that we can do. And when something goes wrong, we'll say out on site, the person that hears about it is the one in the office. Yeah. So what you say is so relevant and so important. And Tony, as we think about that, what are some ways that managers and owners can effectively manage the cost of retrofitting or upgrading their tech? And how do these costs stack up against the benefits that these upgrades have on things like property value, resident retention, and overall marketability, which you're in every day? Yeah.
I mean, it's a common. Obviously, it's a large question with a lot of nuanced answers there. And I think. And Jerrod would probably support this. I mean, it starts from the beginning, right? It starts from the collaboration and identifying your partnership and who you're pursuing this partnership with. On the management side, typically best practice is, evaluate 2 to 3 proposals, right? And make sure that, you have a sense of, and I think in a tough economy, I think there's some level of magnetic pull to the lowest cost option. Jerrod probably checked a little bit about that, but it's not probably your always best option. And I think, it takes a savvy group of, management leadership to understand what are the nuances of scope and layout and game plan for implementing certain types of technology. I think also what's important, for management and ownership groups is before they even come to a team, Jerrod's team, is to have an understanding or really kind of have a direction of what they want to do, what type of technology they think. And if there's anybody that should know their demographic or should know their resident base, I would hope, it's the management team on site. It's the investor of that property or the owner of that property. Not always the case, but, if there's anyone that should know that demographic or know that group of residents and know what's valuable to them and what's not valuable also, it should be them. And so I think, it starts there with really kind of taking a comprehensive understanding and pulling back and collaborating on the management owner side to say, okay, before you even go down the road of costs, right? Well, what is the technology that would be incredibly valuable to our residents? What's our comp set? What's happening in our marketplace? What's happening in our region? What's happening in the world? And, are we chasing the comps? Do we want to be in front of the competitive set as well and be a leader in this marketplace? There's a lot of those questions. And then, of course, that's when you start inviting partners for the bidding process and going through that process. And then once you identify, through your process, who you think would be the best partnership, at that point, again, I think that, the C word that we talked about, communicating along the way about what's involved. Is this all-inclusive packages? Or are these sort of, breakouts a la carte? What are the costs here? And ultimately, and Jerrod will also tell you, sometimes you have to provide some flex and make sure your owners, investors know that, some things arise, especially in a complete building retrofit, that when you pull back the walls and you see what's, behind, in these closets and these other things. I mean, there unfortunately, there are some hidden costs. Anyone who's done, even a home renovation knows that, let alone a multifamily housing renovation. So, that's the process. But I think it comes down to communication, openness, and ultimately flexibility along the way. And then, there are some pretty specific, analysis templates that we can use in regards to valuations, and ultimately, how much value long term or short term does that, based on cap rates at the time and other things, how much value does that bring to the asset? And obviously, until it's realized, meaning fully occupied with all the smart tech and everyone's paying full market rent, a lot of it is thesis, a hypothesis, and projection, to be honest.
Right. Jerrod, what are some best practices when it comes to planning and executing a successful smart home retrofit project for these older multifamily communities out there?
Tony gave a beautiful example of we're getting closer and closer to an emotional connection between the residents and their community. And to me, the success is really in the planning and execution phases, because you've already listened to the customer, you know what they want to do, you know what the property is about. Now it's about getting closer and closer to that emotional connection. And right now, to me, it comes in two parts. A project manager needs to be placed right in the center that is dedicated to coordinating and implementing everything and answering to deadlines and holding accountability at the utmost. If you miss any of those, it can impact that emotional connection the resident may miss if we don't do it the right way. The second piece is the support. What I mean by that is present and then post, meaning that during the installation and post implementation, you have to have someone that's there. There are people going through change management, whether it is the property staff or the residents. Whenever they have an interaction, they need a SME, an expert, someone who can give them advice, let them get through an education to where they can provide a strong emotional connection, which then impacts the ownership, developers, and builders that we deal with, to really maximize that value of investment. Because if they're not connected, they're not utilizing it, they're not going to see the value of living in those particular units, and we've missed the mark. And it all comes down to that really fine point of emotional connection the resident's going to make.
An additional point that I want to add to this, and this is me talking to managers and operators, is, Jerrod and his team, in my personal opinion, and I think how this works best, is it's a partnership. Jerrod and his team doesn't work for you, nor should they be treated that way per se. Sure, they're providing a service, but I think there's a sentiment there, and I think Jerrod spoke to the EQ. There's a mutual respect there, and it should be. And unfortunately, there's sometimes an imbalance in our business. I've found that I think there's some perception that suppliers work for us, and we can speak and talk to them in ways that are frankly not professional. And so I think it's really important in a big retrofit like this, and it could be small, and it could be a lot of different services. But it's just something top of mind for me. I think it's an evolution of our industry to continue to, if we're going to call ourselves partners, let's treat each other that way as well. And I think that's going to serve both sides of the aisle, in the absolute best way, to where best product, service, and delivery will be executed for the benefit of both the investor and the resident. And that's ideally what I hope everybody's coming to the table to execute.
Tony, what role does education and engagement play in the successful adoption of smart home technologies?
Yeah, so I think there's two facets to that, and I think it's a great question. I think training, implementation, adoption is twofold, and I'd love to get Jerrod's take on this as well. But ultimately, it's employee and site teams, adoption, education, training, and then there's a component of the resident, right? It's not just one or the other. Really, frankly, it has to be both. To be honest, my experience has been, I think this is sometimes a forgotten component to all of this. And I would also argue that between those two parties, at least from a supplier standpoint, what's paramount to them, or at least probably where they can affect the most positive impact or positive change, is their ability and resources and support to the employees and the management company or the operations there. Because if they're well equipped, they're fully bought in, they understand the ins and outs of what has just been integrated, they then are going to feel empowered to be able to sell that to the current resident base, prospects that walk through the door. And at the end of the day, they're going to feel great about themselves, well educated, smart, savvy. They're going to go tell their family and friends at home, I know all this new tech talk, right? And so they're going to feel good about that, right? And I think that's just some of the simplistic way for suppliers to be thinking about, how can I really empower this team to feel like experts in this space, although maybe they're not technically, but at least at their property they should be, frankly, because residents in time will be asking them, sometimes very nuanced questions, troubleshooting questions, other things, and they don't want to be referred to Jerrod's team to unravel or unpack them. They've never met Jerrod's team. I would rather talk to Cynthia, the manager, to figure this out than Jerrod and his team. I've never met the guy. He's probably nice, but I never met the guy. I would rather talk to, Megan in the office and have her help me resolve that. And I think that's an opportunity, not only on the supplier side to make sure that they give them the tools and resources, but frankly, again, my audience largely and my background is management ops. That's also our obligation to also step up, elevate a bit, and learn as much as we possibly can so that we can be a further resource. And frankly, investors and owners expect that of the management team to do that, but obviously they also expect that of the suppliers. I think it goes hand in hand with educating the residents. If you educate the employees and the site team on the technology and how it works and the ins and outs, they should be well equipped to train, educate the residents as well. Because ultimately, and I think this is where a lot on the supplier side, especially when you're new to this game and technology, but you're new to multifamily, the feedback that I get sort of nationally is, man, this industry and this process is super fragmented, and there's a lot of components to this. And they're not wrong. I'm sure some of them rethink, like, is this the industry I want to jump in? Because there's a lot of layers, and let's be honest. And so, that resident layer is just another part of it. But if your residents don't like the technology, and it's usually not because the technology is not working, it's largely because of user error or lack of an ability to communicate the effectiveness or the full potential of the technology.
So true.
So obviously, we can go on and on, but Jerrod, I'd love to get...
Efficiencies matter. Technology can be scary. If it adds more time and more work to your life, no one's going to be bought in. So the ultimate goal, what Tony's mentioning here, is fantastic. And that is, what's the WIFO? What's in it for me? And we need to be able to drive value at all levels, from the resident, property staff, and ownership, and try to be a helper in the industry to drive efficiencies. That's our ultimate goal, because if we have that buy-in, it's not so scary to make those changes happen. And then you have a level of trust you didn't have before.
Well, and I think from my perspective, when I used to negotiate and handle ancillary services, I think one of the most important things is, with regard to training, realizing that the turnover happens in the office staff. And so you may train the team once in the beginning when you roll out this project, but it's important that the training be ongoing, so that if there are new members to the site, that you are capturing them too, letting them know how things work and educating them in the same way. So making sure, if you're a provider to a property, that you're continuing to touch that property after the retrofit happens, and checking in and seeing how things are working for them and continuing that relationship. That's what was always so important to me. So I thought it was worth a mention that that should be ongoing, because I know Cox did that very effectively when I had contracts with them. And they continued to go out to the properties, and they were able to capture anyone that had happened as a result of turnover in the office.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that, and I think it's a great point that you make, Valerie, is in some capacities based on contractual obligations or lack thereof, sometimes there may be a supplier that can't allow for extended service or whatever the case is. But what you can do in the minimum is provide sort of a guideline or something that you can hand off, whether it be digital or hard copy of a resource that leadership or management team can continue to use as a resource to educate and train new employees and things of that sort. Obviously, the ideal situation is an evergreen relationship and ongoing support and correspondence, and you hope to be able to negotiate that in your contract or have that relationship with that supplier. But in some cases, you don't always have that. But I think it's wise of suppliers to be thinking, regardless if I'm gone or not, I want this to remain an absolute value add, because frankly, it's also from a pure relationship standpoint, it's going to potentially land our relationship on the next big retrofit in the next 5 to 10 years, potentially, right? Because, that's how rapidly technology is happening, and maybe sooner than 5 to 10 years these days. It's 3 to 5 maybe now, right? So, just be thinking about all angles of it. I'm not on the supplier side, so, who am I? But, I'm just suggesting consideration of that as well. And I think it's a great point that you made, Valerie.
You are someone with an important voice. Tony, how do you balance the desire for cutting edge technology with the need to maintain affordability for residents?
I think it's a good question. I think the reality is, I think you need to know your residents. We talked about this earlier. I think you need to know what they like, what they do on the weekends. I think you need to take a really introspective approach of who your community is and what's most important to them. Because I will tell you, if you push something onto your residents, technology, it could even be hardware, new carpet and new LED lighting, and you are operating a property that ultimately those residents don't see value in some of this. Implementing and executing from tech to carpet to LED lighting is going to be a challenge, and ultimately what it tells the other party, and I often use like spousal metaphors. What you tell the other party is, and what they hear in you saying, you're going to love this, and if they truly don't see value in that, all they're going to hear is, you don't know me. And you don't know what I find value in, and there's a problem, and we need to talk to someone about it, right? So we need to go talk to your regional manager about this. Anyway, I think it comes down to just thoroughly understanding who your community is, knowing your market backwards and forwards, and ultimately, there's a financial component there, that ROI that we talked about, that regardless of they're ready or not, or emotionally connected to the new tech or the LED. If the marketplace is ready for it, ultimately, then it becomes your challenge of being persuasive and helping them understand that this is hopefully going to be a benefit to their life and their experience while living at your property. And you also have to play a ratio of convincing 70%, 80%, whatever that number is. You're never going to get 100% in life, and you just ultimately have to be okay with that. But ultimately, if you feel the majority of residents would benefit from this, whether they see it now or not, you just need to come prepared with a case analysis and understanding of what's happening in and around you. And technology, we've mentioned it a few times, can be very scary for certain demographics and people that are familiar with tech or not familiar with tech. The less you are familiar with tech, the scary tech is. And as you become, the cool thing is, I think our industry, our world has started to embrace tech more than ever. And I'm sure there's some scary parts of tech that have kind of the boogeyman attached to them. But I think if you could less mystify or boogie them, the better for everybody. Not sure that's a technical term.
Jerrod, how can owners and managers leverage smart home technology to improve efficiency and reduce operational cost?
Tony just said something that I think, if you put a disclaimer on the top, absolute value add. This is where everything comes to life. If you cannot give efficiencies, time, or operational effectiveness to your staff, it's not worth doing it. Let's just call it what it is. So we need to be able to provide that. And what that means is, a manager should be able to run their property from their office or from their dashboard. Things like managing the energy and the lights and the unoccupied units and the deep integration to other tech solutions that are on the property. But the last one to me is the most valuable, and it's alerts. The most time that most property staff say they would love to have back is, show me something proactive that's going to tell me what's to come. So something as simple as a water leak in one unit could be disastrous for a property staff team. We want to be able to help the maintenance and staff that are in the leasing offices by helping them be proactive, get those alerts now, and then maybe they can just have a weekend versus spending the whole weekend trying to clean things up. And that comes with utilization. Utilization's key. Get them past the boogeyman, as Tony put it, and get them into confidence. Once they're in confidence, through snackable training sessions with their account manager, to then implementation and utilization on their own, Once they have that confidence, they now become a big fan of also the technology, getting those people through that change management and into that more reward zone and emotional connection we talked about earlier.
That proactiveness is so important. And to Tony's point earlier too, I think like knowing your residents, he made that point with knowing your residents, but part of that is prospects will come in asking for things. Your residents will come in asking for things. You can survey them. There are so many things that you can do to find out what's important and what's going to add value. But I think that preventative aspect is so important.
I just want to double down on that preventative aspect is from an owner's perspective and for suppliers to double down on that message. I mean, one preventative discovery proactively of a leak or major water damage to a property in and of itself potentially could cover the entire cost of a retrofit. So
Right.
I think it's really important for those in this space, and Jerrod knows this as well as his, business development team and sales team communicates with those on the ground to help them understand that, this type of technology, especially the preventative stuff, is it not only can save you insurance on insurance rates, but really can save you real costs, real dollars, and ultimately, in some ways, be able to help offset any sort of large costs, because we all know, and we're here in Texas, the snow apocalypse and just all the things that have happened. Not that, some technology would have been able to sort of prevent some of that, but the reality is, yes, in some ways it could have in different ways. And so, anyway, I just wanted to double down, and the point that Jerrod made was absolutely correct and brilliant.
I love that. A question I actually have for you both is, are there ways that owners and managers can actually ensure that the technology that they choose today will remain relevant and adaptable as new innovations emerge and more tech comes on later? Because we all know it's advancing so quickly.
Tony started our conversation with choosing the right partner. So whether it's me or another partner, you've got to ask those questions. You got to choose the one you're comfortable with, and you got to choose one that actually also can provide the following. Number one, they can actually tell you what's in the pipeline to come, because what you're choosing today needs to have extensions, updates, and further technology to drive more efficiencies in the future. Whether the property is 20 years old or 20 minutes old, if they cannot provide that plan, you may be stuck with technology that might not be relevant in a few years. It's going fast. Choose that partner wisely. That is probably the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, I think there's a few different components here. Obviously, I think there's an investment component. Owners may have a different perspective on how long they're going to hold the asset or how long they currently have it, right? And that may also, I think, equip some of their decisions. But the point that I really want to make, and Jerrod makes a great point as well in regards to the partnership and partnering with the right subject matter experts for the future. But I'm going to challenge operators and managers that may be listening to this. I think it's also on them to get more involved in understanding the technologies of today, but also understanding the technologies of tomorrow, to be able to sort of see the dots that are out there, the stars, if you will, proverbial, and connect them and align them and see what is ahead, so that you can be asking informative and thoughtful questions to Jerrod and his team that maybe, if you're good enough, you could even challenge them in some ways to say, well, I heard about this or I heard about that, and how does this connect? And do you see this being, part of the technology discussion in 3 to 5 years down the road? And, and then sit back, listen to their thoughtful response, and, obviously evaluate if they're aligned with you or not, which I trust Jerrod's team usually always is. But I also don't think, and I think for far too long, and maybe this is a bit of a soapbox, and I don't want to sort of extend it in this way, but I think far too long, us as managers and operators, we sat back and we sort of just said, all I do is ops, and all I do is the basic, job description. No, the world is changing, and frankly, automation, centralization, AI, they're going to change the game, and that's for a whole nother probably podcast in and of itself. But I think it's imperative and crucial for property managers and on-site teams, as well as management leadership, to be looking to the future, to say what is happening, how can we continue to embrace today but adapt to tomorrow, and that will give you the most competitive chance in being relevant for tomorrow. And not only relevant for, to be competitive in your comp set with other management groups, but also to be relevant to your residents and others. And so I just want to implore and challenge our side of things to be forward looking, because I know Jerrod and his team are, I assume, challenging his team from a research and development standpoint to say what's next. We're not just talking about what we're implementing today, but we're taking a look. I'm sure you and your team, Jerrod, are looking at what's happening in the future. And I would just challenge managers, operators, investors to be doing the same thing. There's a lot of resources and thought leadership available. You could probably just YouTube a lot of it, and ultimately, I think it'll lead to better, more constructive, thoughtful conversations. Ultimately around tech and ultimately around what is retrofitting in the future.
Well, we have had so many wonderful tidbits from both of you today, but I'm wondering if there's anything as we wrap up today that you want to leave the audience with as a bit of parting advice. What is the most important thing that you want them to walk away with today after our conversation? So, Jerrod, I'll start with you.
Innovation's no longer a surprise when it happens. It's rather just part of our lives, an expectation, if you would. We all need to find ways to make life better with this technology. We've given many examples of that today. Yes, there's a lot to it, but it's going to make life better. We just have to work together to make it happen.
I love that. Thank you. Tony, final words.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think if we can demystify and take the boogie out of the boogeyman on technology as we go forward, I think it's important. And a way to do that is through, in my opinion, upskilling and educating yourself about what's ahead, what the future has in store. And I think the more you do that and more you commit yourself to understanding what the future has in store, I think technology and other things will be less scary, and I think you'll be able to operate with more of a clarity. And ultimately, I think leadership will improve along the way if at all levels everybody's doing that. So,
thank you both for all of the thoughts and the laughs that we've had together today, and the great education that you've brought to our audience. I appreciate both of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again to Tony and Jerrod for being on the show today and sharing so many amazing insights. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening. I'm Valerie Sargent, and this has been Open Door, brought to you by Cox Communities. We're in the top 1% of business podcasts for a reason. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment.